Hello, ELIC 30. This is Michael, and we are in How to Be Human, An Autistic Man's Guide to Life by Jory Fleming with Lyric Winnick. Both very interesting names. We are continuing in Chapter 4, and we are at the top of page 95, where Lyric Winnick, LW, poses a question. That type of response is very sophisticated and self-aware. How did you learn to do this? Jory: I'm very much aware that I have no idea what's going on, and almost anything I think is going to be unhelpful. I do tend to recognize that pretty quickly, or I'll make one mistake and pick up on the mistake right away. In the past, my reaction had been pretty much nothing because I wasn't sure what to do. But I think other people often have unhealthy reactions and they totally know what's going on. So I have that excuse. But there was a particular experience that really helped me. I was signing up to be a peer leader for the University of South Carolina's first-year seminar. All the peer leaders had to take a class on how to facilitate conversations, and we were given a manual. There was a section in the manual on how to respond to people that are in distress or emotional. It was very specific, step by step. I loved it. Step 1 was acknowledge their concern and discuss. Help the participant discover where it comes from, and then make sure you help find organic solutions. Make sure you don't use these words. The manual provided a specific list of words which imply judgment. Instead, use these words, which are neutral, and add more explanation. It listed phrases you could use, which was not unknown material to me, but it was very much like, oh, thank God, somebody provided me with a manual. I saved that manual. I still have it as a file on my computer. And every now and again, when I don't have anything to do, I will sometimes look at it because it's super helpful. It's stuff like, when you respond to somebody's contribution, make sure you say, thank you for saying that, which is neutral and welcoming, as opposed to responding with anything like a judgment or an imperative type question. It gave the reasons why responding that way is not going to be helpful and not going to help somebody grow. It had a metaphor that used a plant. The way you help a plant grow is by giving it what it needs, not what the gardener thinks is best. It was mind-blowing to me to have that level of specificity and say, do this, not that. It's almost like now I have a be a good friend mode that I can activate. It's a weird paradox that being completely unaware and knowing I was completely unaware made me realize what I couldn't do. So when I was told things, I would be receptive. Now I make sure that I think about my response before I say it. I make sure that it first acknowledges and then welcomes the contribution, where it's coming from, acknowledging all of that before proceeding. Following that kind of rule. It's simple, but yes, it's very hard to do. You have to be self-aware. Some people might call it high emotional intelligence, which is hilariously ironic because on my side, it comes from a space of very little emotional intelligence. But it gives me direction, which enables me to act on what little I do have, even if I don't have a lot in the first place. Who knows how much of the world's knowledge is locked up in manuals that nobody's thought to read? Our discussion then pivoted on another challenge for Jory, the give and take of conversation. We talked about the challenges of listening and responding, of back and forth exchanges, and of his struggles with interrupting, a struggle, I would note, that many people of all abilities have. LW. After you started applying this manual's advice, did you notice a difference in how people responded to you? Jory. People thought that I was a really good listener, and I was a good listener because part of the instructions tell you to make sure that you shepherd the conversation and not intrude, because intrusions can shut it down. The idea that people sometimes need time to think and don't need your response. Internalizing this did make me objectively a better listener, something that I'm still working on applying to situations that are not emotional. One of the problems I have in normal conversations or intellectual conversations is that sometimes I interject. It's because if I don't say it more or less immediately, I'm going to lose it. My mind can't hold on to the idea if it's forced to be translated into language. I can't think of what to say and listen at the same time, but that leads to interrupting, which is bad in conversations. LW. What's the hardest challenge between trying to formulate what you want to say, and still staying current with the ongoing conversation? Jory. So there are two challenges. The first of which is, obviously, if you miss something that was said, your response may not fully address, or, in the worst case, might be coming off as if you weren't paying attention fully to what they were saying. Because there definitely are people who only sort of half listen to what you're saying before pontificating about their great speech that they're going to give in reply. And I definitely don't want to be that person. Then the second problem that can arise is that it can lead to a tendency to interrupt, in the sense that if I have a thought, if I don't speak it, it's gone. I have to weigh whether this contribution is valuable enough to interrupt. But I don't want to do that too often, because then you are just interrupting people too often, and that's no fun for them. On the other hand, I'll definitely forget it, because then I'll be listening, and I'll totally lose what I meant to say, and I'll stay silent. It makes it tough because it means I participate less or interrupt more, both of which are not really great. LW. What is the challenge about holding or remembering thoughts? I would add that a lot of people struggle to varying degrees with that issue and with interrupting. Jory. It makes sense that this wouldn't be just related to autism, but I think in my case it's probably exacerbated by the fact that when I translate thoughts into words, it takes a lot of mental processing. I have to work harder to think about how to appropriately phrase my ideas so they come off with some semblance of sense. After I do, it's not saved where I can easily redo it. It's like after I do that each time, my brain needs the processing space back, so it deletes the bridge between the thoughts and words. Even if it's only 20 seconds later, the words have fallen off because they're no longer supported by anything mentally. Sometimes I'll be able to recover it and surprise myself with, oh, that's what I was going to say. LW. You're always worried that people will misinterpret what you've said. But what are some of the ways that you might misinterpret things that are said to you? How does that work? Jory. Mom will be the first to tell you that I do that. There are definitely bits where I will miss chunks of what people have said and not realize it. I think that's partly due to the fact that if I'm not solely focused on what somebody is speaking, that I'll miss it, which is tough in conversations because that means if I start trying to think of what I might like to say in reply, I'll miss the tail end of what they said. Another related problem is that when anyone, myself included, presents an idea, there are always the assumptions that went into crafting their thinking. Other people might inherently understand these things better than me, because they all think in a similar manner. But I don't automatically make the same assumptions. That's where the trouble comes in, particularly with groups. Everyone else in the group can move forward, and I will be left behind. I may not even be aware that they've moved on. Later, I get confused. But I don't want to be stopping the group all the time and slowing things down. LW. To put it another way, it's a dual processing issue, trying to listen and follow their train of thought, while also formulating how you're going to respond. Jory. Yes, it's very single track in the sense that I can't do both very well. Another way is that I will sometimes think people said one word and they actually said a similar word, but one that has a different meaning. In some cases, it can actually be pretty far off. That kind of misunderstanding or misinterpreting is a problem. Then there's also the bit that if people say things that are especially loaded with emotional or other types of context dependencies, I will have a tendency to miss that. Pause. What he just described is what we call connotations. Words can have positive connotations or negative connotations, which are separate from the precise meanings of the words. And he's saying he often misses the connotations. Continuing on. I'm very bad at picking up sarcasm. In the past, people have said something sarcastic, and I responded in a way that's not typical because I thought they meant what they said. I feel like those are really awkward moments for me. LW. Which is easy for you to follow, a spoken argument, or a speech, or a written document? Jory. Before, I might have said that I preferred something written, but at this point, I would say that good writers and good speakers are kind of the same for me. I will respond to clarity and good communication, which can be evident in both, or very much lacking in both. A really well-written book will probably be a really good public speaker in most cases for me, but even a bad public speaker is much better than a poorly written anything. I've been trying to make my way through a famous economics book, The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. It's just so dry. He's talking about grain prices, and there's nothing to make those ideas easier to grasp and assimilate. I can at least get something from people that are dry and not the best at speaking, but if it's a mind-numbingly boring book, I struggle with that. And that's the end of the chapter.